Hello and welcome to the HTML5 lecture series at SNHU. My name is Tom Adamson. I'm a visiting professor, and this is lecture 29 on JavaScript OOP. And OOP, as you know, right, everybody knows what OOP is. OOP stands for Object Oriented Programming. And here's what you'll find. Most students that have taken object-oriented programming, this is generally what they will say. I don't understand OOP. And here's the students that would say that, if you can believe that. Here's a student here who would say that. Here's another student that would say that. Here's another student that probably say the same thing. And another student over here that would say that. Even though they've had courses in it, they would say, I don't understand it. And probably the reason why they don't understand it is because they never saw a real practical application, how it was helpful. Okay, so let me get my notes here. And let's get some facts about object-oriented programming in JavaScript. Okay, so the first fact is, that some people don't realize, is that JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language. So the first thing about JavaScript is that JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language. As a matter of fact, I can make a statement that everything in JavaScript is an object. Now that's quite a profound statement. If I say that everything in JavaScript is an object, you're going to say, wait a minute, that's pretty far out. You're going to have to prove that. All right, so to prove it, I'm going to have the camera go to the screen. And then I'm going to do a little bit of code here. And let's see, to do this code, I want to come here to this. And here's the code I got. And what I'm going to do, let me enlarge this somewhat so we can see it better. Okay, I guess we can see that all right. Here's what I've done. I put in the script element. That's all I've done. I'm making a variable, the AR, and the identifier is message. And the message is hello world. Now notice, I didn't tell JavaScript what data type this is. I didn't have to say string or anything like that. JavaScript has loose data typing. And it's smart enough to figure out that if I put something inside quotation marks, it's probably a string. It's not an integer, it's not a float, it's not a Boolean. Now, once I've declared that as an identifier and it knows it's a string, look what I can do now. I can create another variable x which is equal to message.length. Hey, where did the .length come from? I did not define that. the thing is, that's built into JavaScript. JavaScript now knows, since this is a string, okay, there's all kinds of properties and methods that I can do with a string. So right here it says message length. So now I have an alert box that says the message length is plus X, and this is concatenating. So what should be the message length? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, so let's try it. Let's actually run that script, stay on the screen there, and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to come here, and here it is. And it says the message length is 12, as you would expect. Let me reduce this just a bit so we don't have that kind of problem. Okay, now let's see what my next one is. We're going to stay on the screen. I'm going to open it with my favorite editor, Notepad. Okay. And as you recall, staying on the screen here, this is what we had in our very last lecture about the canvas. We had the canvas element, we had the width, we had the height, and we had to put something in there so we could see the darn thing. And this was an inline styling. So it's not good to use inline styling. It's not good programming practice to do that. So what first thing I'm going to do to improve this, I'm going to take the styling and put it up here in the head element so that that styling can apply to every canvas that I make. So staying on the screen there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, let's see, this is number 1 here. Okay. And now I'm going to go to, bear with me on this, number 2. Okay, where is 2? 2 is, just a minute, I saw it. There's 2 right there. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a style element. I'm going to do a Control-C, come right up here, and I'm going to do it in right after the title, right here, a Control-V. There's my style element, and I'm going to remove it from here. Now the advantage of doing this is that for every canvas that I make, I can go ahead and use that particular format. I don't have to keep putting it in as part of the inline code. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and refresh this and see, yeah. My canvas width, and there's the height, and there's the border. Let's see, is this the one that I'm supposed to have? Bear with me on this. This is example 1. Yeah, and it's not showing the canvas. All right, let me explain what I've done here. What I've done is that I put the style up here. Here's the style element. And I made it so that the canvas border is 1 pixel, solid, and it's black. This is pretty much what we did in the last lecture. And I have a canvas ID now, which I'm calling C1 for canvas 1. And now I'm using the script here in order to draw this rectangle in there. This stuff that I had up here simply draws the border around the canvas. This here, if you recall, will actually draw the rectangle within there. So here I get a document get element by ID C1, and this makes it so that this relates now to the HTML element and so on. Now the problem with this is that if I want to make another canvas, I got to use another set of code like this all over again. And if I wanted to make 3 or 4 canvases here, I got to keep using the same set of code. I can't keep reusing the code. I have to copy paste and change the element by ID to now C2, say for a second canvas, and so on. Okay, what I'd like to do is go to the screen here. I mean, go to the board. Go to the board. I'm sorry. And let me get my my academic notes here. Another neat thing about JavaScript is that JavaScript allows you to create your own objects. Now, there's a lot of people that don't believe that. A lot of people think that you can't create your create objects with JavaScript. And the reason why is that JavaScript does not use the traditional methods for creating objects. And the reason why is because JavaScript does not use classes. Now, for those of you that have never had object-oriented programming, this probably doesn't mean anything to you. Like, okay, big deal, doesn't use a class. And I don't care because I don't even know what a class is. Well, if you did know what a class is and you've heard that word, you were a programmer, and you heard that JavaScript doesn't use classes, you'd say, well, can't make objects with it. But that's not true. JavaScript is a prototype based language. It is not class-based. And again, this may not mean a lot to you if you've never had object-oriented programming before. JavaScript is a prototype-based language. It is not a class-based language. So you sort of have to fake it. But I'm going to give you a practical example of what JavaScript can do. Okay, so what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go back to the screen, and I'm going to need to find a cap. When we go back to the screen there, I'm going to need to find a cap for this, because if I don't, oh, I found it, it'll dry out. Okay, here's what I'm going to do with this. And I hope this works. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this convoluted code down here to draw this rectangle, and I'm going to move it up into the body. I'm going to move it up into the body here. And when I do that, here's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it like this. Okay, I'm going to do a Control X, and I'm going to come up here, do a Control V. All right, and in order to use this in the head element now, I have to make a function out of it. So I'm going to have a function. And let me see, what am I going to call that? I need to have an identifier for the function. And the identifier is going to be, let's say, draw a rectangle. How's that? D-R-A-W-R-E-C-T. And then I put these in. And then I come over here and I put this left squiggly thing in. And I come down here and I put in the right squiggly thing and that defines the function. Now, since the function is in the head element, it's not going to really do anything. If I'm going to save this with a Control S, and if I come back over here and do a refresh, bang, it's gone. Of course, what's left is the outline of my canvas element, but that's what you would see down here. Now, in order to use that, here's what I need to do. I need to come down here and I need to put another script. And I can put the script down here. And I can call that function. I can put draw rectangle. This in, okay? And then let me close the script tag. I'm going to do a Control S to save. I'm going to come back here and do a refresh. And there it is. Now, let me show you what, I'm going to come up here to the screen. What I've done is already an advantage. Let me explain to you what I mean. I made this code once, and I don't have to look at this code anymore, because this code is sort of a pain in the neck. So the code's up there, but what I've done is I've made it so that I've abstracted it to a simple command that says draw rect. And all I have to do is do that. And every time I do that, I'll get that on the screen. Of course, you might say, well, that's really super duper, but supposing I wanted to make another canvas, what would I do? Okay, let me make another canvas element. Stay on the screen here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this canvas element. I'm going to highlight it. Come on. Control C. I'm going to come here, Control V. And I have to give this a different ID if I want to distinguish one from the other. And so I'm going to call that Canvas 2. All right. All right. So let's see what happens when I draw the rectangle. I'm going to save it, and here I go. Whoa! I get the other canvas element. I get this, but the problem is that when I go to draw the rectangle, it only appears here. Why? What's the difference? The difference is in the ID. If I have another canvas element, its ID has to be different from that one. And the problem is that you see this C1 up here? This C1 is hard-coded. If I could make that a variable so that I could come down here and just change the C1 value, to change it to C2, I could use draw rectangle again, and I could have the red square over here. So how could I do that? How could I change something up here that's hard-coded? How could I make it so that it's actually a variable? And down here, I could just put a very simple command in here in order to make it so I could change that. Well, here's how I do that. I'm going to stay on the screen here. I'm going to make it so I don't have to hard code it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another function. And the other function, I'm going to call it function. And I'm going to call it image class. I could call it any legitimate variable identifier that I wanted to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable out of the ID element, the ID, okay? And I'm going to call it this. This dot is reserved in JavaScript, and I'm going to call it ID. And as soon as I do that, I've made ID a variable, and I'm going to give it a default value of C1 for canvas 1, okay? And you might say, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Don't just bear with me on this. And I want to be able to use that function draw rectangle. So I'm going to put DRAW-RECT is equal to DRAW-RECT without the parentheses, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it. So what I've done is I've made another function, and I'm going to do a Control S to save it. I'm going to come back to the screen here. I've made this other function that I called an image class. And I used the keyword this. the keyword this means that this right here is going to be a variable now that I can modify. This means that I'm going to be using this function. And right here, this right here, C1, is no longer going to be C1 because that's hard-coded. I'm going to change this right here to a variable. Which variable am I going to change it to? I'm going to change it to this.id. And I'm going to do it right here. Stay on the screen. Okay. So I'm coming here. I'm going to change this to this.id. Now the ID is a variable. You might say, well, okay, so what's changed about it? Well, here's what's changed about it. When I come down here, what I need to do now is I need to create, where I have draw rectangle, I need to create an object. And bear with me, I'll show you what that means. I'm going to call it my image, and I'm going to make it equal to a new image class. And we're going to come back to the screen here. Image class comes from this, the name of this function up here that I created. And I'm making this, my image, a new image class. And as soon as I do that, that will take on the properties that I've defined here. Well, a property is nothing more than a variable. So one of the properties that this will take on is the ID property. It also takes on a method. A method is something that happens. Well, functions are methods. This is making something happen. So once I do that, if I want to do this now, here's what I do. This object now takes on these properties in this method. So I'm going to continue with the coding on the screen. And I'm going to say now, my image dot, and I can now say draw rectangle. Like that. I'm going to do a Control S to save it. I'm going to do a refresh. And it draws a rectangle just like it did before. But now watch the difference here. I can now, this is a variable, the ID is in a variable, my image dot ID. I'm going to now change that. I'm going to make that equal to C2. And now I'm going to draw it again. I'm going to draw it again, okay? Control S, and I'm going to come over here and refresh it. Now, let's see what happened. Let me bring this up a bit. What I've done is I've made the getElementById, I made that a variable. And since that's a variable, and what did I call it? I called that variable the ID. Okay, and since it's now a variable, I can come down here, and the object that I created, this can be any legitimate variable name, my image, I can make the ID now equal to C2, which is for this canvas element. And now I can say draw the rectangle. And now it will, but instead of drawing it for this one, it's drawing it for this one. So what I can do is I can have as many canvas elements up here that I want, each with a unique ID, and the only code I have to use is right here. I get to reuse this code over and over and over again without having to rewrite it. What I've done is I've encapsulated all this stuff together, and I've abstracted it by just saying all you need to know is image class. This coding here for multiple canvases is a lot easier than doing it the old-fashioned way. Now, supposing you say, okay, that's great, Adamson, but the problem is I'm just getting the stupid red rectangle. Supposing I want that rectangle color to be a different color. Can you make the color a variable? Well, let's see. I come up here, what determines the color? Right here. Fill style determines the color. How do I know that? Because red's a color. This is hard-coded. Supposing I made this a variable as well. That way I can come down here and change the colors. So how do I make this a variable? Well, what I have to do is that this right here is a property, so I go up here and I define a new property, and I'll call it color. So we'll stay on the screen here. So let's see. I come up here and I go, this color is equal to, and I'll give it a default value. Let's say the default value is red, okay? That's fine. And now what I'll do is that I'll come down here to where it said red, and I'll put in a variable now, instead of having it hard-coded. And I'll put in this color. Okay. Now the default value for this color is red, so I should still be getting the red. But if I come down here now, down to the bottom, where I had the ID for C2, was C2, I'm going to put now my image, and now it's going to be dot color, and I'm going to make it blue. And now let's see what happens. And now it's blue. So let's see what I did this time. What I'm trying to do is that these things in here that are hard-coded, I'm trying to make them variables. I can make them variables by making them properties in my, what I'm calling my image class. So if I make them properties, that means coming down here with very simple code, I can now start making complex objects. Okay, so what else is hard-coded? Well, this right here, 2D, it's always going to be like that. But how about the x and y coordinates of the rectangle? That means where does it start? This is the x and y where it starts within the canvas element. This is the width and this is the height. If I could make these variables as well, I can now change the size and position of my rectangle just by doing some simple code down here. So let's do that. Let's change the x position. Well, make that, instead of hard coding it to 0, let's make it so I can make it a variable. How do I do that? Well, I come right up here, right? You should get the idea by now, hopefully. So if I make a mistake, you know, yell, I'll probably hear you over the internet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come up here and put this. Now how about we just call it a capital X for where it's located. And for right now, I'll make it equal to a 0. I'm not going to put it in quotation marks because it's not a string, it's a number. And then I'm going to come down here to where X normally is, and I'm going to call it this dot X. That's my dot notation. Okay, so let's just see if everything works. Still should be the same as I had before, and there it is. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to come down here to C2 and not only make the color blue, but I also want my image dot X, I want it now to be 50, meaning I'm going to move it over to the right 50. Going to do a Control S, and I do a refresh, and now it's moved over 50. So let me bring this down here just a bit. I'm going to come back to the screen. So what I'm doing here is that I'm taking all of this hard-coded stuff and I'm converting it into variables. And I do that by using the this operator, this dot. And I can make it this dot y. I can make it this dot anything I wanted to. But x and y sort of makes sense. And then what I do is I put that variable name, this dot x, and then this dot y, this dot width, and then this dot height. I put that here. And that means now when I want to do a rectangle, the only code I need to know is this. So all of this code here, I don't even have to have on this document. I can put all this code in a separate document. Well, let's see how I do that. Stay on the screen, please. Okay, so let me, I'm going to minimize this guy here. Yes, this is the one I'm looking for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put, to really make this abstract and encapsulate and what have you, I'm going to take all this code that's in the script and I'm going to put it in a separate file. Let me stretch this out here. The file I'm going to put it in is, I'm going to call it canvas.js, okay? And what I want to do here is I want to create a new, my favorite text document, and I want to call it canvas, see, canvas.js. I could call it anything I wanted to, okay? But unfortunately, let's see. Come on, let me rename it. The extension must be .js. Okay, .js. Okay. Yes, I want to change it. Okay, now I'm going to open up the canvas.js. Okay, like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this script right here, do a Control X to get rid of it, come back here, do a Control V to put it in there, get rid of these script tags right here, okay, like that, come back here and file and save this right there. So now I have a canvas.js, and look how simpler the code is. Let's see if it still works. Sure does. Now what I've done is I've totally abstracted this. What I've done now is I've taken all of that code that I just generated, I put it in a separate file called canvas.js, and from now on I don't have to worry about what it is. That's called encapsulation. And I've abstracted it. All I need to know is that it's called the image class and that it has this method and these properties. And I'm going to leave it as an exercise for the student to finish the rest of the properties and then see the advantage of object-oriented programming. This is the major advantage. It just makes life simpler. It makes it so that you can program quicker, and you can modify things quicker, and you can maintain code quicker in less time. And employers love that less time phrase because it saves them money. Okay, that's it for this lecture. Thank you for attending.